This is Arjun here, Head of Research at InvestorKit. And today I'm joined by a very dear friend of mine, Joe. Joe and I have worked closely alongside his wife, Gianna, to really build on their portfolio, and that too, an already established experience portfolio. So we thought we'd use this chat today to go through the mind of a 7 property owner, that too working on his eighth with us together as we speak, and just unpack the journey a little bit more to understand the journey as well as the highs, the lows, and the learnings, and just take you all through it. So, Joe, welcome on, my friend.
Thanks very much for having me, Arjun. Appreciate it.
And mate, I guess I wanted to start off with something that many people don't always realize. They think that working with a buyer's agent means you've got to be a green investor, you don't have to know anything about property, and you really need this help. But that's not the case for you. You came in as an experienced investor already owning 3 properties, multiple in Sydney too, which is not cheap to do. So I just want to understand what was going through your mind as an experienced investor who now decided to say, hey, maybe it's time for me to, take a professional's help for the next stages.
Yeah, interesting question because I certainly wouldn't have characterized myself as experienced, right? But uh, to answer your question, I thought that I knew what I was doing fairly well. I certainly thought I had a grasp on the long-term goal, the strategy, how to get there, and how to execute. I had probably more than an amateur grasp on that. But the more I dug into property and started to understand how to research and the things to look for, I started to come across the concept of a buyer's agent. And then the more I dug into that a little bit, the more I started to understand the differences between researchers and maybe a spruiker or something like that. So and the more I dug into that, the more I exposed myself to those kind of elements, then the more I started to understand that there's a real craft to the research side, and there are certainly massive upside to going down a path that's properly researched, that's really well executed. So I guess once I got a proper appreciation for that, I decided that I could probably try and forge ahead and do it myself, but I would absolutely like to try at least once going with a professional. Ended up being yourself. And to be honest, now that I've done that once, I already told myself, Gianna and I spoke about it, and we said we'd never look back, because the upside was far greater than what we thought we could realize with our fairly time poor selves, what we could realize ourselves. So yeah, for us, it's a no-brainer now, and would never look back.
Mate, I've always been wanting to ask you this question. There was obviously on that, decision that you've committed to now of like, hey, this is a no-brainer. I want to go there. The timeline of the purchases for the first 3 versus the purchases of the next 4 together. The condensed on these next 4 versus the first 3, is there a gear that switches in you two as a couple when you've got that support? Or is it more so you'd always plan to have this gear switch? I'm just interested to know, fascinated about that.
Yeah, and this is something actually I think about and reflect on a fair bit, Arjun. So no, to answer your question directly, no, there was not a plan to switch gears that way. So it took us, it might have been roughly 10 years for the first 3. And then for the next 4 was in the space of, I think that's 3, maybe 4 years, but you'll tell me because
I think 3 years. Hey, dude.
3, yeah. Okay. So the plan was definitely not to go that way. But this is, I guess, coming back to that very clear upside that I realized of having the experts around you to do this stuff, to invest the time to research, to deliver you quality proposals that genuinely deliver on what they say they will do. This upside that I'm talking about is that ability to scale quicker. So I could have gone out and done my own research and got the 4th property anywhere that I thought was going to be good, and it might have taken a year to start growing in value. It might have taken 10 years. But the likelihood that it's going to deliver quicker is higher when it's well researched. And so as soon as that fourth property, the first one that I used you for, started to deliver in that really faster time frame, we realized that actually this is the advantage of using the professionals, and that will let us scale our portfolio quicker, which will then let us either stop buying quicker or change our goals, like grow our goals, of what we had originally planned for further down the track, or it just gave us a whole lot of options. So, our goals of what we want to achieve in the future are still there. They're probably a little bit grander than they were before you and I met. But we're also very, very, very clearly and very much on track to achieving that because of the quality of the properties that you found us, I guess. So yeah, it wasn't something that we'd pre-planned to kind of scale in this way in the last few years. It was just seeing how possible it was after the first and then the second and so on, that we realized, all right, we'll commit to this plan of action because this is going to get us where we want to go.
Yeah, look, thank you for sharing that, dude, because I've never asked that before, but I actually touched on this point in another video, and it was around what's called the tight buying window versus the perfect buying journey. And too many people aspire for that perfect buying journey of going, sun shines out, it's spring, banks are handing out cash, just going out, let's go, let's lend. The government's saying everything's fine, there's no pandemic, the media's going, property's your best friend, right? And maybe this happens once every 4 or 5 years. And so they might acquire even the same properties. Let's just say they're the same savvy researcher, the same, savvy investor that finds the spots, the same exact purchases, 5 purchases, 10, 15 years. All you're doing is finding those perfect spots versus you, where you go, hold on a minute, we've got a plan, we've got an outcome that we're seeking, and that plan and outcome that we're seeking actually becomes harder to do the more stretched your buying window is. Exactly. Because people sometimes forget the growth isn't coming from the buying, it's actually coming from the holding once you buy.
Exactly.
So I actually, don't want to be buying for you for the next 20 years. I want to buy for you for the next 3 years to know you're set for the next 17. So like the key there is that you've grasped that and you've just gone, hey, whatever's happening in the world, it's this buying window. And speaking of whatever's happening in the world, freaking COVID, man. COVID came out of nowhere, and 2020, and that doesn't slow the roll. What's going through your mind? You and Gianna sitting together, having the Italian coffee and going, hey, this pandemic's hit. What do you guys do?
I think I might have even have put a couple of questions to you around that at the time. From my vague memory, I might have even have said to you something like, what do you think, Arjun? Should we really, be pressing ahead at such speed with that? Might have even been our first, I think, property, or second maybe. And I vaguely remember something like, should we really be pressing ahead with such speed? Because maybe we should wait and see how, for 6 months or 9 months, how the market pans out. With the pandemic picking up, are people going to lose their jobs? Is that going to lead to mortgage defaults? Are we going to see an ease, not a crash, but maybe an ease in prices, and then should be our buying window? And so yeah, we certainly had those conversations, and I'm pretty sure I put that to you as well. And your counsel was what your counsel was, basically. And my vague recollection tells me it was just basically like, there are, as you just kind of described, there's the perfect buying window, but we're not looking for that, right? We're not planning around that, because you only really see that clearly once it's passed anyway. So yeah, we pressed ahead, and now I see it as well after 4 properties since we first met. I see the value in kind of ignoring those other factors, and even now that we're seeing interest rates rise, we're seeing some prices in some areas soften, we're seeing sentiment drop a little bit. All that's happening around us. But as you said in the beginning, we're going for, at the moment, we're going through the process to pick up another one if we can. because as you detail in all your white papers and your podcasts, I listen to that all the time, by the way. Yes. So as you detail, right, there are still opportunities in areas that should be looked at. And if I've learned anything over the past 3-4 years of working with you and watching you work as well for others, it's that those pockets of opportunity are always going to continue to come along. So the fantastic part of that is that whether it's me or someone else, they can be on their journey. They can go through scaling their portfolio, regardless of what other macro factors, maybe for the most part, are happening, because there's going to be pockets of opportunity. You just have to, know where they are and vet them and qualify them, which is where you come in. So,
yeah, look, that actually speaks to the whole point of borderless buying, right? And I think that also in itself was a big change, because the first 3 places that you purchased and had prior us connecting were in Sydney. And then the first place we talk about, I'm like, hey, dude, epic country town. I'm keen to show you what's happening in not a capital city. And what I found actually quite interesting was there wasn't as much challenge on that in comparison to sometimes what the newer investors who are really spreading their wings to go outside of Sydney, their first mindset is, oh, I want to go Brisbane, Adelaide, which is great because we were also buying there at that time and the data said those 2 cities were great. But they would have been stuffed if the cities there weren't going well. And you know what I mean? And I'm just fortunate that those 2 cities were now buying approval. But I showed you something out in Bendigo back pre-pandemic, and it was just like, sounds good, Arjun, let's make this happen. What was going through your mind at that point?
That's the face that we showed to you. So between Gianna and I, we trawled through your proposal, in great detail. We after we bought it as well, my accountant, the very next time I met with my accountant's like, bought in Bendigo? What's wrong with you? Explain that to me. Why the hell did you do that? And so it was an adjustment, because you know what, it comes back to the education that your parents give you, I guess, growing up. My background's Italian, the old school WOG mindset of, buy the house, near the family, and pay the mortgage off and blah, blah, blah. And so I never considered ever looking anywhere outside of Sydney, not even outside of, somewhat of our local areas, basically. But as I said, coming back to your question, we trawled through your proposal in a lot of detail. I fact-checked it, quite honestly, as much as I could. And I validated as much as I could. I might have asked you a couple of qualifying questions as well, which you would have knocked out of the park. And in the end, we couldn't find a reason not to go, and just try it. And as I said to you earlier in the chat, is we wanted to try this professional route, right, at least once. So part of that was trusting the professional, and trusting the process, trusting the research. And
on that trusting the professional, sorry to jump in, dude, but the accountant, you raised something really interesting there. And this is where I think people, honestly, they stuff up, because what happens is they go, mortgage broker said this, accountant said this, buyer's agent said this, wife says this, husband says this, mate says that.
Yeah.
And they just miscompute, let me go to the most comfortable scenario.
Yeah,
that also, I mean, if you unpack, that would be great, because professionals, funnily enough, the accountant is not a property professional. Many people think that just because they bring their property tax to them, we help a lot of accountants do property buying for them. We help a lot of mortgage brokers. We help a lot of lawyers as clients. They come to us still. The key is that it's separation of professionals, isn't it?
Well, that's it. And you can say you go to the accountant for advice because you take your property tax to them, or you go to your uncle for advice because he's got 3 properties. He's 75 and retired, and he's got 3 properties, so I'll go to him for advice. But at the end of the day, you're a professional because what you live and breathe, what you do 24/7 for 7 days a week, if people don't know that about you, is you research this stuff, right? So if anyone was going to kind of have the trump card from that point of view, I guess it's you and your team. But back, when we went with that first purchase with you, part of the thought process in the end for making the decision to pull the trigger was, as we said, we wanted to give that professional route a try at least once, to see what the outcome was. So, we tossed around a few different things, but ultimately it came down to, if we're going to give you the best possibility to deliver for us, then we have to kind of trust your research, trust your process. And honestly, we thought, the chances of failure were slim. The chances of not paying off as well as you suggested it might were not as slim, but still relatively slim. So we were comfortable overall to give it a crack. And worst case, if it failed, we could flip it, kind of thing. So in the end, we just decide to give you that trust, give you that chance, and the rest is history, I guess.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, I actually, just before you purchased that first property in Bendigo, I'd actually also purchased myself in Bendigo too.
Right. Yep.
So it was kind of that whole, further to that trust component.
That's right.
We were both in it together.
Exactly. And actually, you're right. That factored into our thinking. Sorry.
Like, we rise together, fall together. No, luckily not falling together, man. So
yeah.
But I think on that note, what's actually been really interesting to learn as well in this whole journey to regional investing and looking at other markets, that was one of our best performers in the whole portfolio. Like, I think we bought that in the 300s.
Yeah.
And now that's in, like, close to 600, if not in the low sixes. This is huge, right? It just showcases when you do incorporate data into it, in 2 years, just over 2 years, you've seen some substantial gains there. And then from there, what I really liked about it is that, once you kind of seen the results of the first, you did really expand to all in every city. The questions that you asked weren't the same now, because it's almost like certain boxes had been ticked across how to look at different cities. Because we then took our journey from Bendigo to Adelaide, Adelaide to Bundaberg/Bargara.
Yeah.
And, when we looked at that journey, I guess what went through your mind now in terms of just that huge pace change? I know we talked about before how your goals changed, but these were very quick succession. These were any and every city now. Yeah. It almost felt like, you just had a pen ready to sign whatever. It's just coming your way. What was trying to go through your mind now as you went through this change?
Yeah, it was pretty much that. It was pretty much, we were just like, all right, when is the next soonest time that we can buy? As soon as we can, Arjun, pull the trigger, basically. So it was a case of once we had gone through that first purchase, and it was maybe X month later, 9 months later or something like that, and we were seeing that growth. It rented, before it settled, I'm pretty sure we had a tenant lined up, and they were paying, if I'm not wrong, $20 over market as well. So the yield was excellent, right from day one. So once we'd seen that and validated that the process that you laid out worked and it really delivered, it was just a case of, all right, let this guy do his thing. The team that he's got is crushing it. He's crushing it. So let's just let him do his thing. All we have to do, Gianna and I, is just make sure that we keep our borrowing capacity strong. So we kind of geared ourselves towards making that happen. And then once we saw the pace of the capital growth, we were like, okay, we're going to be able to use equity to scale our portfolio quicker. So let's focus on that for a period of time. We hadn't defined that yet, but let's focus on that for a period of time, because we realized that we could really pick up a number of properties pretty quickly, grow our portfolio pretty quickly. And then that, like I said, that would translate to maybe a little bit grander goals of what our retirement looks like. So we're like, we've got to give this a red hot crack. So it was more like, once we saw it could work, we committed to going down that path as almost as hard as we could, for that short time. And then the trust in you was secure. So it was just a matter of, I think our next conversation was, Arjun, we're ready. whatever you got, basically, something to that effect. And we really didn't care. We weren't selective, and I'm pretty sure as soon as you put forward to us the first proposal of the first property that you had found that matched our criteria, you know, I loosely validated it, especially very loosely compared to the first time. And then we were just like, yep, let's get it. If you can get it, get it. So it's
I think
straightforward after that.
that second property, the pace changed definitely in terms of and onwards from due diligence and things like that. Because whilst the pace remained the same for us and all the checks that we do, it changed for you. And what's interesting is, you know, you come from a tech product background. There's so much knowledge across various products, and you know, I was gonna think that, dude, this guy's gonna be the hardest guy to work with because he's just gonna like hammer like 90 different technicalities, specifications, understanding of products like deeply, and then I'm just like, okay, this is gonna be tough. But it was completely the opposite, man. So hats off to you in terms of trusting and building a team around you to grow, right? And if I'm not mistaken, the second one also wasn't on the internet. We got that off market in Adelaide.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Adelaide,
that was also a new experience for you.
Yes.
But I guess looking at the journey, not so much from a results perspective, but if you were to think of maybe the top 2 or 3 tips that you can give others, either A, property investing in general, or B, when working with a property professional, what are some of the tips that you can give them so they can start to think of the scale and the results that you've achieved?
Yeah, I often think about this, and I easily boil it down to one thing. Remember earlier in the conversation, I said something like, you know, you said you go to your accountant because you take your your property tax to them for property advice, and I said you might go to your uncle because he's got 3 properties, so you go to him for property advice. People still come to me for property advice, and I tell them basically the same thing that I'm going to say right now, which is I'm not the expert. Right, I've been along the journey, of course, and I'm very focused on the detail that comes along, but I'm not the expert. I'm not the one dedicating 8 hours a day, 7 days a week to doing the research. I'm not the one that has this breadth of vision and this breadth of experience. Right, that's, you know, Arjun and the InvestorKit team. So, you know, when people come to me for property advice, I basically tell them I use a property researcher. You know, I'm not ashamed of that. You know, it's a valid service, and it delivers on it delivers value, so it delivers on the promise. So my advice would be to do that. Basically, you know, don't go to a non-expert for advice. Do some research yourself, fine, but accept that you're not going to be able to do the scale and the volume and the detail of research that the InvestorKit team can do. So consider leaning on them. You know, for your next purchase, give it a go once, like I did, like Gianna and I did. And if the results aren't what you want, then at least you tried. More than likely, the results will be what you want, plus more. So that's my advice, mate. One thing.
At the same time, knowing you, I know you can't wait to be that 75-year-old uncle with the barbecue with 20 plus properties, and you know the kids coming up to you and asking you, Uncle Joe, how did you do this? Oh, let me tell you, young buck, I've got a story on that.
But if we do things right, you'll be at the barbecue, and I just point to you, and I just say, "Don't bother, Uncle Arjun."
Well, look, I'll be by the food, man. So I wouldn't really want to be bothered anyway. If it's you cooking, I'll be by the food, and I'll make sure that you know, I can't be bothered.
No worries. Sounds good.
Well, dude, I think, you know, what you've just shared there has just been very special in terms of, you know, the journey. And the last and final question I have is that if you were to reflect on our work together and our relationship together, and you were to say, hey, if I had to go back to the start, or if I was presented 6 or 7 other buyers agents that all were highly recommended, it would be this one thing that stood out from your team, Arjun, that was the whole reason and will be the reason ongoing why I keep working with your team. What do you feel that one thing would be?
That's a very good question. And I had something jump to mind. I'm just trying to think if anything else jumps to mind, and I can't think of anything. The one thing that I think it boils down to is right from the beginning, I just in conversation with you could see that you're just a genuine guy. You certainly know your craft. You do the work. but ultimately you're very down to earth and you're a genuine guy. So the comfort that Gianna and I got from believing, from seeing that, you know, you're genuine, and we only felt that you had our best interests at heart. And, you know, we trusted, at that time, the investor team was much smaller. So we trusted that the business had our, you know, best interests at heart only. That's, I think, what it came down to. And now that we have the relationship that we have, you know, we have the history that we have, obviously that's all, you know, cemented. But yeah, at the time it was, I think, your genuine nature that made us really have that faith. So,
well, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And you've done a fantastic job together with, you know, with Gianna. 7 properties in such a short succession. And like you said, we're working together as we speak on the 8th and unlocking that. I have no doubt what you've done here together is that there's this element of scale for risk protection and diversity. There's scale for actually when you get to a future consolidate stage of your portfolio, you have much more options that creates a greater passive income. And lastly, the best thing about it is, if I'm not mistaken, we're on this journey where you're able to go from not only having a portfolio that grows in value and does all that, but it actually, there's an underestimated point many don't realize, is once you get to a certain number of scale, you almost never have to use your own cash again.
yeah.
And there's something so powerful with that, to know that, hey, as a couple, every single dollar we save is for us, our buffer, our safety, our leisure, our future things, family or kids or anything. There's something about that many first-time investors don't quite realize. It actually becomes so much easier in this department of risk and safety once you get to more properties, not the other way around, less debt, less results. So hats off to you for coming to that realizing point together with Gianna, and we'll speak soon.
Mate, thanks very much for the chat. Appreciate it.
See ya.